Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, we've been starting seeds, Batavia, and have you seen any issues with your seeds yet?
No, I'm still at the early stages of, is it going to germinate? Am I fast forwarding, getting too far into the episode? Good grief.
No, you're not. No, I mean, that's part of it. But so today we are obviously talking about diagnosing seedling issues, and most of these can be turned around fairly quickly, and it's a lot easier than you would think. But I think the important part is recognizing what we're seeing. Mm-hmm. Don't you think? Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's going to be the first step in knowing what to do about, what a potential issue is. Underlying potential. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be anything, but we'll crack that nut here in a minute. But before we do, I want to say, welcome back to the Backyard Gardens podcast, everybody. I am your host, Ben, and I am with Batavia, and she is in Chicago, and I'm in coastal North Carolina, which is important for this because you can figure out your seed starting dates and stuff throughout this conversation. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by becoming a patron, a subscriber, or you can pick yourself up some seeds. We've got all of those listed on Etsy, and they're ready to ship out. And please pick some up. It'll help support the show, and you'll get something for your garden. That was perfect timing, I tell you. Leonard switched that camera right on time.
Did you see that? Oh, was there no credit for the bail in the timing? Just, okay.
No, that. It was like, boom, boom.
I just wanted to make sure we're giving credit where credit's due.
Oh, definitely. And also, we do have a special announcement. We released the 4, is it 4, Batavia, or 5? 4 spring videos on YouTube, but they're coming out on audio. The first one actually aired last week, so you can catch up on that, and they'll be coming out. And that's really the things that we deem to make successful for your garden, so you can use those to your advantage.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. We'll take credit away now.
I know, right? We're back to square one.
Way back. All right, so seed issues. What is it? Let me get my notes up here. Okay. So what are the problems that you can think of, Batavia, just right off the head? Not, just like, what are we looking for? Like, what kind of issues?
Dryness, limpness, maybe what appears to be slow growth.
I didn't think about slow growth. That's a good one.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm here for. For all of the things that you don't think of.
Yeah. No, it's, different things that will factor into your seed. I mean, let's face it. When you first start a seedling, they're basically pre-programmed to do what they want to do. But as you get them going and they get older and bigger, different issues will arise. And a lot of it depends on what you use in your garden or in your seed starting mix. So that will drive it a lot too. And we need to account for that and understand what we're using.
I've learned that the hard way. All things aren't equal when it comes to being indoors and that kind of soil medium, if you will. It's funny because the first couple of days post germination, it's going to be like the best ever for your seedlings, for all seedlings, right? Like everything looks good. You have those first little, signs of green, and then it's 5 days later, 10 days later, 15 days later. Like, what are you working with? And that's where we're going to kind of dig in today. There are definitely some, I wouldn't say false positives, generally speaking, if those seedlings emerge they, like you said, they have built in what it takes for them to come through that soil to pop up, and then it's really on you. I've even seen, I'm using the mix that you use. I ordered that online, that big white and black bag, or a white bag with the black writing. Yeah. And so
it's Pro Mix with mycorrhizae.
Yeah. And I read, once I got the bag, it said something like, there's enough food in the mixture to like feed it. I think it's like 10 days after germination or something. Like it gives you a specific time frame to say, all right, this is going to feed this plant. Now it's on you to care for it further, which I guess by description implies, again, that seedlings need to be fed. Because I'm still fighting that, right?
I was just editing one of the episodes, and that I had to, for some reason, I had to keep going back to that 1 second, and you were like, and I'm fighting you, I'm begrudgingly agreeing with you, and it was like over and over and over. So I know that you are having an issue with that, but
drinking game every time I say begrudgingly, and I mean it every time I say it too.
Oh man, yeah, look, if there's one thing I know about Miss Batavia, when she says something, she means it. So that's her. But I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do, and there's a lot of, and I was spending some time picking out a listener question of the day, and I think we're going to go ahead and just get this one out of the way. So I'm going to give the shout out to the person that did it, because it's just going to come up in conversation, and it would be awkward to go back and re-answer it again. So, Paula on the Backyard Gardens Community Garden on Facebook, which is free to join, come see us. She asked, how many hours should grow lights be on to do their job well?
Hey, hey, Paula. You see, I have to fight for y'all, fight to greet you. Well, if you're watching the video, you'll see exactly what transpired in the fight. It's almost worth, if you're listening to audio, it's almost worth going back at least for that 1 minute to see what happened.
Yeah, it was at 6 minutes and 40 seconds roughly. So go check it out if you want. Yeah, I felt bad. I was on a roll. So anyways, it's a great question. And a lot of people do a lot of different things. You see a lot of things on the internet, and it's really difficult because not all lights are created equal, but this is one of the symptoms, and you start to get leggy plants. And so leggy plants can be a number of, I actually have a new way to get leggy plants. I've created it myself. So we'll get into that in a second too. Yeah.
Patent pending.
Super annoying. It's a stupid problem to have too. But it's all about light. And so I run my lights 18 hours on, 6 hours off. What do you do, Batavia?
I do 16 on and 8 off.
There you go. Right off the bat. Now mine comes from when I was living in a cannabis-friendly state, and we grew cannabis, and that was the standard, 18 hours on, 6 off. And I just always adopted that and moved on. And the one thing that really led me to do that is because cannabis won't flower until you get 12 hours of light, 12 hours of darkness. So I always took that as like, that's less light. It's going to make it flower. And you obviously didn't want to do that, because you can take cannabis and grow a plant for 10 years as long as the light's the same, as long as it's more light than darkness. So we kind of adopted that here, and it's worked really well for me. I get a lot of growth. It's, I think, fairly fast. I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, I don't, it's a good example of how, that's 2 hours difference, right? What would I say, 16 on? Yeah, 2 hours difference. And I don't know that it makes that big of a difference in your growing space versus mine. To be quite frank, when I heard you were doing 18, I could have changed to 18 to see if I had different results, but it's such a pain setting those timers for me. So I have a timer set for a house plant, like a lamp, and it's like I'm falling asleep on the couch at 9 o'clock at night, and the light is still on, and I'm just like, I'm pulling it out of the wall before I'm going to reset it, So I generally think, though, amount of light, time definitely is a starting point, but the proximity from your lights, especially if you're using non-traditional grow lights, like being an IR, the proximity from your light to your plant really is a driver of legginess if you don't have those lights close enough to the plants. Here he goes.
Yeah. Because I mean, the world's changed since I starting seeds. I mean, it's changed a lot. When I first started, first of all, this is the first grow light I've ever used. And to be completely honest, I'm not even sure if it's like anything special, like an actual grow light.
Yeah.
But when I first started, I was using those curly CFL bulbs. I use those all for many, actually, I've used those longer than I've actually used what I'm using now in time. And, I kept them an inch from the top of the plants, and what we ended up getting was because of the design of those and the way we were doing them. And I had built my first system. So, we had lights, and it was the light spread that was the issue. And a lot of times you'll see that is you'll get spots, like how far the light spreads from the bulb to the actual plant.
Yeah.
And then the closeness of it, because you got to remember, I mean, how far is the sun from us? A couple million miles, whatever. Somebody's going to comment. And that's how powerful that is.
Yeah.
Now, our lights are nowhere near that. So one issue that I've seen is people will buy really high-powered grow lights, and then they'll have to keep their grow lights like feet above, or else it'll burn the plants, which is an incredible waste of space.
Yeah.
So these lower powered, I like them because I can keep them compact. I can get more plants in, and if they start to get leggy, you lower them down, and that will generally help.
It allows for more growth on that shelf as well. So I was doing this motion because if you've not custom designed your seed starting area, which many of us have not, so I have just regular shop lights, the ones you'll get at your average, home improvement store or hardware store. And the lights on the shelves, the wire shelving that I use, the actual light itself doesn't necessarily cover the entire length of the shelf, or even the entire width of the shelf. So I actually have two lights set up. And what ends up happening sometimes is whatever's on the far end on either side, so the width or the length, those don't get as much light as, let's say, something sitting in the center of the shelf, right? And that just requires a little bit of rotation. It's not that big of a deal for me. But it's a good example of how plants, plainly put, you'll hear people say they're reaching for the light. That's when you see plants leaning over. That's when you see plants becoming leggy, because they're fighting to get to what they need.
Well, and the first time I really experienced that was when I was first started and I was putting plants in a windowsill. That was the first time I got it, and it was a sad sight. I mean, to be honest.
Geico makes it easy to get affordable renter's insurance in as little as 90 seconds. That way, you have more energy for harder things, like the laundry. Why is it so difficult to fold clothes? They just end up wrinkly anyway, or on the floor in a pile that just sits there, taunting you. But with renter's insurance through Geico, at least you know that those clothes and the other things you love are covered. Get more with Geico.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience and their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's LIBSYN, ads.com today.
It's not something I really ever recommend people doing. And I know, look, I've recommended it before. And people are like, I do it all the time. Fine. But if you're getting legginess issues and that's what you're doing, you need to adjust. And a grow light can be a number of things. So let's not get hung up on that. And now look, if you need a grow light and you don't know what to get, there's an Amazon link below. And in the seed starting section, it has everything you need. And that's stuff that we use. Batavia is using fluorescent lights.
No, I'm not.
So what are they? What kind of bulb? You were at one point.
No. You always get this confused.
Now I'm confused. No. I did. So what are you using? What kind of bulbs are you using?
I'm using LED or LED.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that was the conversation. I kept on saying, which one is it?
Yeah.
And these are still the original lights from when I got my setup in 2020, so.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I don't know if they weaken over time. I'm currently trying to figure that out because, fluorescents would weaken, CFLs would weaken, LEDs, I think they just die. So I'm trying to figure that out. But so if you're getting legginess, add more light and then also get your light closer and don't be afraid to get that light right on top of those seeds. I mean, mine are literally an inch above and I try to keep, and I even let my plants, before I move it, they will engulf the whole bulb before I actually lift those plants up, those lights up.
Yeah, I was doing the measurement. It's about, kind of this is the distance. So that's about an inch, right? Kind of 2 fingers together between the top of the plant. And of course, as these plants are growing, you're adjusting either the plant further down from the light or the light further away, because obviously they're getting higher and higher. When I say further, it's still about an inch, but you need to move your lights up or your plants down to accommodate that growth. And it's one of the things I'm thinking about closely this year when it comes to, are my plants telling me that it's time to get them outside? Again, assuming I've started them on a proper schedule. Right. So if I have to make tomato plants are a good example of things where I'm just like, I'm doing all kinds of magic tricks because they are absolutely outgrown. I'm like putting lights on the shelf above the shelf that the plants are on, which again, in the past, I've looked back and said, they should have been outside. So there's that.
So before we go to the next one, I do have to ask you, when you said 2 fingers, you held them up like
side
this. Do you mean like that?
No, I meant I don't know why I put 2 fingers up versus 1, but no,
okay.
I meant flat, laying them flat, not, kind of up.
Yeah. I'm having a hard time with that because now that we're on YouTube, come check us out. And I keep forgetting that people can actually see our fingers, so and stuff that we do. So I just want to make sure so we don't have any questions. And the other thing too is once you get a plant that's too leggy, you can't really reverse it. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
that's
it's almost a futile effort, so I'm like 99% there with you. You can, for some plants, tomato plants for sure, you can bury some of the stem, but once it gets to the point of leggy and it's kind of toppling over.
Well, burying the stem is different. Okay. We're talking about in the house. And what I'm referring to is when the top of the plant just kind of flops over. It's really hard. What will happen is if you get the light closer and you do everything that, we've suggested, the plant will actually start to grow up and curl up towards the light, but it's not, the whole stem's not just going to stand back up and be like, cool, we're here. You've kind of, so it's important to stay on top of it and be ahead of the game. But just know that once and it's not the end of the world if you catch it in time, but if they get too leggy, and I think tomatoes are really the one standout. I mean, you can always plant them deeper, but the problem is going to be that you're going to have those plants laying over, and it's like a snowball effect. What ends up happening is they will actually shade out other plants in the process.
Yeah, that's what I meant by burying them deeper. It potting up and burying the stem, even indoors, like when you're still under lights. So I think that, almost like take a moment. You said if you catch it soon enough. This actually introduces the question of how often are you checking on your seedlings, right? So
are you asking me, or is that rhetorical?
Oh, when I got to the end of the sentence, it would have been rhetorical. No, in all seriousness, you think about if we're talking all about diagnosing problems, no different than we talk about how often are you in your garden. You need to be in your garden to see things. I think your seedlings indoors, especially in that first probably 3 weeks or so, you're in a much more sensitive stage, and looking at them based on where I am, I'm checking on them every day. Now, there may be a time or two where there's a couple of days where I'm away or something, and I really try to be strategic around the planning, what stage things are in and so on. But like seedlings don't get so leggy where it's, irreversible in a day. Right.
No.
If you're experiencing that, you probably weren't checking on them soon enough. And that's something that you could fix going forward. Like if you want to start those over, which I've done in some cases, like it's happened to all of us. I'll start, especially if it's a fast growing crop. Some of the squashes that we were talking about recently about to start or not to start, that's a good example of how they actually could probably get super leggy, like within a day and a half,
they're really fast growers. Yeah. I've not done a lot of restarting. I've kind of gotten to where I'm just like, but also I will say this, once you kind of pay attention and you get on top of it, it gets a lot easier. And then you start to figure out how much less time you actually have to spend in your seedling area. At first, when you put your seeds down, you don't really have to check on them a whole lot until they germinate. I mean, look, if you're doing this and you're not checking on them daily, though, I mean, what are you really doing? You know what I mean? Like, check on them. Just take a peek.
Especially when you have things started at different times, which means that they're at different stages of growth. Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I will say this, my way of getting legginess that I've created, which is a really stupid problem to have. So I use plastic domes on top. I used to use saran wrap, and I didn't like that because as soon as a seed came up, it was hitting the saran wrap and it was bending it and putting pressure on it.
Sure.
So I didn't like wasting it. So I bought reusable domes, and I've been using those for 3 years now. And I had just had some rutabagas come out, and they were in there. They were doing good. I left the domes on, and it was kind of cool in my house. We were going through a cold snap, and we don't run our heat real high. And what ended up happening was as they grew, I got a little confident, and I was like, all right, I'll come back and check on them. Well, when I came and checked on them, I left the dome on because I wanted to retain some heat and moisture in there to help because they were kind of slow. The seeds were a little old too. And what ended up happening was those domes, because they had been used so much and they had gotten dirty from the water that evaporates and sits on the top, and that actually impeded the light. So that's kind of an issue. You know what I mean? Like that was like everything else was set up and those got leggy. Now I'm not wasting them. They're outside. And what ended up happening is they flopped over. Some of them did crowd out other ones, stuff like that. So I just kind of said, whatever, and we'll plant them a little bit deeper to help. Right now they're hardening off outside. But that was a stupid issue to have. I mean, now I've got to scrub my domes, which is stupid, but you got to do what you got to do, And yeah, I had a thought and I totally lost it. I'll get it in a second.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Sometimes, when I'm moving things from outside or inside to outside, what ends up happening is the elements of outside, get captured in the trays. And, every now and again, I may have something that I'm starting outside that I still want to cover, not because of humidity, like with one of those domes, but just based on animals and them not getting to them. So I'll cover them. But all you need is one good rain where, I totally get how those things get dirty. And it's a pain to clean them. But it's going to make for a better seed starting area, right? There's a part of me that really loves the idea of the little greenhouse effect that the domes create, but it is a little bit of a burden too, because once you get to the point of, at least in my home, it's a lot of moisture. It's, when it comes to leaving them covered, but I think we're going to get into that in a little bit, like in this next topic, because one of my poor habits probably increases the amount of moisture too.
Yeah, in about 30 seconds we will. I do want to say this, and I'm just going to put a pin in this word. You're going to hear it again soon, and I'm not saying where or when. But thinning is another important thing. So if you have too many seeds in a cell, which, typically we do multiple seeds in a cell for insurance purposes, 2 is better than 1.
Begrudgingly.
Hold on, wait. I'll be hydrated.
That was a
okay?
preemptive drink that I took right before I said that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's the best method. I've come around.
Yeah, but thinning is, don't wait too long to thin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Once you get those first leaves, what are the, not true leaves, the first ones?
Cotyledons. Did we ever, we still haven't confirmed if that's right, but we're going to keep saying it.
Yeah, we're going to keep that. I'm not even going to look it up. I'm just going to go for it. Cotyledons. Once those come up and they've been there for a little while and you start to see a true leaf, go ahead and get ready to thin.
Yeah.
If you put 3 seeds in, thin one out. And then give it a week and then thin the next one out. Just because that in itself will cause shading issues within. You're making a micro, you basically have an artificial sun and you're making a micro growing environment. So be on top of your thinning. It's going to help you. Trust me.
But it also does not, if you don't thin, it's not encouraging kind of an upright growth for the plant you're going to leave there either, right? Because they're sharing that space. Most often, I kind of try to space mine out just a tinge when I'm planting multiple seeds, but it's hard because the places I'm starting them are pretty small. And I kind of want the seed that's going to actually be the plant to be in the center. So what ends up happening is they get kind of close together. And so when you're trying to thin, the older they get, the more likely it is that you're going to damage one of the seedlings you want to keep. Hence the let's get it thinned early. Hence one of the reasons why it's a pain for me, because it's, again, one more thing you have to stay on the timing for. Some things, like some flowers, and I do this for celery too, I will sow heavily or seed heavily indoors, and I'm breaking all of those roots apart, and then kind of potting them based on knowing that I have 6 plants in a little bitty seed cell. That's not the norm for my tomatoes. I don't do that for my peppers. That's not, for my greens, God bless them. So that's just, again, a method that I find actually some comfort in when it comes to separating them, but that's not the norm for most plants, especially not most vegetable plants.
Yeah, and before we get into the next one, I will say this: when you're thinning, just be very careful, because nothing will piss you off more than when you accidentally cut all of your seedlings at once in that seed cell.
Yeah.
It'll piss you off. But all right, so we talked about Batavia brought up watering.
Oh, yes.
And watering is a big, big, big part of this. And a lot of issues can come out of watering, and it can go really slow or it can go really fast for the issue to show up. So we need to know to look for it. And the thing that's kind of funny is this one and the next one, the watering kind of will factor into it. So, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the watering, but the next part of this is discoloration in the leaves. So this will be part of it. And, plainly put, just for the discoloration, over watering will cause discoloration, meaning yellowing in your leaves. It's called colorosis, I think is the technical term, which is stupid. Discoloration sounds great to me. But that it will cause that. And that can be a symptom of multiple things. But for right now, in this very second, we're going to talk about watering, and then we'll get into other reasons for discoloration. Yeah.
This is, I think, the 6th year that I've started seeds indoors. Most everything else has been transplants, going directly into the garden. And maybe a couple of years in between where it's a combination of direct seeding or direct sowing outside and transplants. But 6 years into starting indoors, and I still don't have it down. I am still doing a level of mostly overwatering versus underwatering. And it's been habit. Like each year, I think I'm better at it. I prefer to water from bottom watering, which is, there's a vessel, I'm putting water in, sitting the seed cells in that set of water and letting the water be, basically absorbed into the plant, versus just putting kind of a watering can or some type of watering nozzle and watering basically at the soil line. That's my preference. I don't want to stop doing it, but I so often leave the water sitting, and I want to put enough water in there where I don't need to refill it. Like I have a lot of, I want to do this, I don't want to do that, I want to do this. And oftentimes it leads to problems, but I'm stubborn in that way where I don't want to let the thing I really want to do go. So I end up with very saturated soil in a lot of cases. standing soil is probably one of the recipes for disaster. Like in any place, you know, if it was outside, I'd be fighting off mosquitoes, you know.
Yeah, it's tough. So overwatering, in my experience, so right off the bat, I actually am an underwaterer. I used to be an overwaterer, and then I became very conscious of it, and so now I'm an underwaterer to the tune of, usually if I lose a seedling, it's because I've underwatered, but at the same breath, I don't have any fungus gnats. I haven't had fungus gnats in a few years. So that's been really nice, because that can be kind of a nightmare. But
yes,
that
the anti-bail.
But there's times when overwatering and underwatering really come into play. And we were talking about those domes earlier, and the domes actually help with the overwatering aspect. And I think in Batavia, I don't know if you know this off the bat, as soon as I say it, you'll probably start thinking about it and not understand, but kind of it'll click. Overwatering is the biggest issue, in my opinion. Overwatering is up from the time you plant until you really get your first set of strong, true leaves. That is the danger period for overwatering. Yeah. After that, you get a little bit of leeway.
Yeah, not a lot, but yeah, I think that's a fair assertion. Yeah.
And then you get a week or so in that time frame, and then after that is when you get the real dangerous part for overwatering, where the plant's getting big and the roots are filling the cell, and then underwatering can become a real issue. So that's, in my opinion, that's really where it sits, as the danger periods. And so I wanted to overcome those danger periods.
Yeah.
That was what I wanted.
The very first stage where you're potentially rotting your seed because you've made the soil so wet, right? You know, so beforehand, and then once it emerges, like I think they're just so delicate, these seedlings. Like when you're getting to the point of you're about to move most things outside, they have their bearings more so. In those first several weeks, I think we underestimate how small things really are. Even once you get to a point where some things have quite a bit of growth on top, it depends on the plant when it comes to how big those roots are on the bottom. And so how much water kind of that little soil area that plant needs, it's a learning curve. Right. You know, I generally have the same types of plants in one, you know, kind of seed tray. It's going to be all tomatoes or all peppers, or, you know, not mixing the two. So generally speaking, the watering needs of that one little tray are the same. They've all been started at about the same time. So those are ways that I help myself when it comes to once the plant has a number of true leaves on it. I do think it's more forgiving, like you're saying, like because then I transition into maybe I'm not watering enough. It happens all the time with my peppers. And so those can be revived. You know, those when you see the drooping leaves indoors, I'm still talking about, where I've forgotten for a couple of days, or this plant is basically outgrowing the cell that it's in, you know. Again, there are all kinds of signals, which is the reason why we're talking about this, that the plant gives you. And it's just about how quickly you adjust.
Well, it's use your senses. So, you know, touch the soil. Does it feel dry? Water it. Does it feel soft? I mean, if you touch it and water comes out, hold off, you know. Does it smell funny? Does it smell like something's rotting? That means it's too wet. And just to go back to the very beginning of the episode, and you don't know when you're going to get germination, and it's been a long time, you've probably rotted your seed. That's a big issue, a really big issue. And it's a common beginner's mistake, and not even beginners. I mean, going forward until you get a handle of it. And this is why I moved to the domes, because the dome, when I put it on, when I put the seed in, it's well watered. And then I put the dome on. And then, truthfully, I don't water until the first cotyledons come up and they're nice and strong. And then usually it's time to give them a splash of water. And that's how I've managed it. Now, I don't water my seedlings until they start to crinkle in the leaves. Like it's clear they're running low, and that's for two reasons. The first reason is because I don't want to overwater and cause root rot. And the second reason is I want to, if you take a plant and you starve it from water a little bit, what you'll end up doing is you will encourage that plant to grow more roots, because it's like, hey, I've got to find some water. Let's grow some more roots. So it'll focus on the roots. And then, as we all know, if you got more roots, you got more fruits. So that's really what we're aiming to have, is more roots, more fruits. So I kind of try to do that. Now, it's a dangerous game. Yeah. And it's bit me a few times, but I get a hold of it. I keep, once I water, I bring my watering. I have a little like a half gallon or a 1 gallon watering can. I fill it back up and bring it in there. So if I need to water, I can immediately water. Yeah. And that's the big part of it.
It's definitely something that, if you take that approach, it's with caution. If you're looking at like a 6-pack or a 4-pack, so they're the larger ones that I use, and I normally use those if I'm potting something up. It's still a 6-pack, but the traditional small 6 or 4-packs, even that you'd see in the stores, when you're using those to start seeds, that's like what, 1.5 inches across, maybe 2 inches deep, as far as how much soil you have. That's not a lot to let completely dry out. So I am just very nervous around that. So I've not done what you're describing as far as letting leaves crinkle and, ultimately had success or not had success. I just never really wanted to get there. The only time that I've had that happen, and again, it almost always bounces back, would be, pepper plants. They'll all be limp. The leaves themselves, and give them a good water. No,
we're talking about two different things, though.
Okay.
Yeah, you're talking about extreme. What I'm talking about is you're checking your seeds every day. You know, like if you go in there and you look at your seeds every day, even 30 seconds, you know what those leaves look like. And the second that leaf looks to change a little bit, and it looks like it's 1% puny, you'll be able to tell if you're regularly checking it. That's when I don't wait because once they start to go limp, man, it can be game over instantly, because there's no roots to support the plant.
In both cases, we're putting the plant through a level of stress. The one that I described is more extreme than the one that you described. And I'm not, but I'm not intentionally letting it get to a point. I think that because you have had experiences with overwatering, you've basically honed this ability to say right now to water, right? Yeah. And because I have been stubborn and not wanted to change the way that I water, I've just lived with my overwatering time and time again. So the idea of basically not waiting for a plant to go, even just a small change, I'm not doing that because it's sitting in water, which again is not a recommendation. It's not the proper way. It does for me lead to fungus gnats, and I don't believe it leads to the aphids. I have a whole world of trouble in my basement when it comes to seed starting. I am, for this year, brand new seed starting trays, sales, and soil mixture. I am not taking a chance. I am going to be reformed when it comes to my watering. I shall not be killing bugs all winter and early spring. I will not.
If you go back and watch the video, you're going to be mad at me. That's all I got to say.
I know. Lynn's going to take this clip out intentionally. I hate him for that. Yeah.
Look, so fungus gnats come in your soil.
Going back to a lot of people soil medium.
They boil the soil and all that. I don't boil my soil at all. And I mean, look, I'm going to be honest with you. I got into this, really honing in my watering of my seedlings because my seedlings were out in my living room, basically. And I remember one time my wife came to me and she's like, you got to do something about these fungus gnats. And I said, well, what am I going to do? Yeah. And so then I was like, all right. So we went through, I did another batch of seeds. I boiled it, still got fungus gnats, and it's like, what the hell? And it's like, it was overwatering, plain and simple. And so now I just kind of got into that habit, and I check my seedlings are right here. And I think the biggest thing is just, it's like a lot of things, just remove the friction from yourself. When you're watering it, like, we have to understand, if you're going to have a garden and you're going to start your garden from seeds, you need to take the time to take care of them. I mean, plain and simple. You don't let your child roll around in a dirty diaper for hours and days. You change the diaper. It's the same thing. So it's like, you water the seeds, take 30 seconds, fill it back up, and leave it there so it's always prepared for you. On the other hand, that can be dangerous because then you always have water at the ready. Well, so you got to be a little bit careful.
Like a cup of water is different than water that has soil in it, depending on what kind of soil mixture you started, right? Like all of that mixes into the feeding on kind of itself. The fungus gnats were the worst last year. For the years prior, they weren't that bad. It wasn't more like if you leave a banana, on the counter, you forget about it and it's like, oh, I'll have to fight fungus gnats for a couple of weeks. Like that was what the experience had been the prior years. Last year, I was ready to go into full hazmat suit. Like,
Yeah. That's how it was for me that year. It was like, you go in there and you just be like fanning all the time and it just didn't work. And you can help if you've overwatered your plants. You're going there and you're like, oh crap, maybe that's the situation, like right now, and you've overwatered. There's a couple things you can do. One, putting a fan on your seedlings is really good because it strengthens the stems, prepares them to go outside. So you can set the fan on there and it will help blow the moisture off and it will dry out the surface of the soil, which is where a lot of the roots are. A lot of them are surface roots. And the other thing you can, and first of all, stop watering. And you'll be amazed in how long you can go without watering if you've overwatered. Yeah. And the other thing is add some bottom heat. That bottom heat will get that out of there and it'll literally turn it into humidity.
That's a really good idea.
Talking about the water. We're talking about the water cycle here, people. And so you can do that in emergency. You can do that and it will help reverse it. And again, you're going to be surprised, but until you get a lot of roots in your plant, you have to have a lot of roots. But once you start to get roots and a good, healthy root system, then it's going to start using up a lot of water and it's going to be watering it fast to the tune of you're going to have to water right before you harden off outside. You'll probably have to water every other day for a while. And that's something that we need to understand too. And that's actually my trigger for if I've done everything right and my timing is right, once I start to do that, and it starts to water constantly, I'm like, man, these things need water. Yeah. It's like, it's time to get them outside. Yeah. Because quite frankly, I'm tired of watering them. I'm tired of taking care of them. I'm going to move them billy goats outside and just keep watering them outside where it can be messy and then plant them out. So that's kind of how that trigger works for me.
And it almost feels like it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. The growth indoors is just going to be different than growth outdoors. I've seen things explode once I got them outside, even in their little seed trays, Amen. So you look at it and you say it's in the exact same home that, it was indoors, and you get it outside and it's like in a week, even when you're hardening it off, you may see growth that you haven't seen in the last 2.5 weeks. While it was indoors, so it's, I do hope to be, I've been kind of saying it out loud and talking to maybe non-gardening people some, because, folks are like, oh, is it time? Well, actually, it's not that. It's it's almost time, or it's time, or I've started. And they're like, really? And so then I start to walk through some of the things we've talked about more recently, a number of weeks. And I'm like really building up to the end of March, really building up to it. I have to do this for myself because I don't like the cold, and there's still going to be many days that are pretty cold. So I have to kind of talk myself into getting out there. But I know all the things that go into this. I know that it will be easier for me to manage things indoors when there's less indoors, right? I know that the plant health will be better once it actually gets outside and into the elements. And that, of course, is assuming I've done all the things that I should have been doing in the weeks that they were going inside.
Well, and before we move on to the next one, what Batavia just said about the growth exploding when it goes outside, this comes from the first one we talked about. And if you got to think about it, if you're running your lights 18 hours, 16 hours a day, whatever, and you move them outside and they're only getting like 6 hours of light, but they're getting much, much, much more powerful light. And that's just supercharge them. I mean, it's almost like giving them a shot of steroids. I mean, it literally will. It amazes me too. Like, I'll put them outside and be like, all right, cool. Things get busy, weather gets weird. And I'm like, let me hold off. Let me not plant yet. And then I'm like, holy crap, I've got to plant, because now they're getting leggy outside because they've outgrown the cells and they're starting to shade each other out, you know? And so you get this weird thing that you've got to deal with. So it's all of this is wrapped together, but we'd be remiss if we didn't get into discoloration. And we talked about it originally. And we mentioned in the beginning as well, but overwatering can cause yellow leaves. Absolutely. Now, disclaimer right off the bat, not all seed starting mixes are created equal. What you use is what you use, and that's for you, and that's good. But typically speaking, a seed starting mix does not have a lot of nutrients in it. So Batavia was smart enough, which, by the way, I've never read the bag, said it tells you it has enough food for the first 10 days. And then after that, you need to supplement. So this is where you start to get a lot of discoloration, and waters can get very, very murky about what you need to be doing. And you can, if you go fertilizing wrong, you can instantly kill everything. So we got to be very careful with what we use. And there's multiple ways to do it. And the first thing is, if you see yellow coloration and your soil's soggy, stop watering and see if that reverses it at all, if you see more growth. If you haven't fertilized, and we'll get into fertilization, give it some fertilizer. Now that you know, Batavia, that you only have 10 days from the time that seed comes up, what is your plan? Camera on you.
Yeah, so he knows this is one of those areas that I get sensitive about. So generally speaking, I'm on like
Leonard, zoom in.
Yeah, right. I'm on like a 2-week schedule when it comes to fertilizing indoors, and it's a diluted fish and seaweed fertilizer, and it's only because it's what I have on hand and it's what I also use outside, right? You know, so I'm really about, you know, if I can repurpose something. I generally speaking, my tomato plants and pepper plants can do okay, meaning they don't look like they're experiencing some health woes. My leafy green plants, that they show themselves more so as far as needing food, you know, again, higher nitrogen, and that's really what my fertilizer is. So about every 2 weeks. Now, if you think about, you're really working with something that's going to be indoors on the low end 4 weeks, and on some of the higher ends, maybe up to 10 or 12 weeks. That lets you know how often you're fertilizing. For a leafy green that may be in my grow area 6 weeks, I'm only fertilizing like twice. You know, for something like a pepper plant, I'm a little bit more, I probably stretch it a little bit more. Like once I get, you know, 3 weeks in or something, because it may take that long to even before it sets its first true leaves. And so I'm trying to balance, you know, all right, it only has food for 10 days, but I also want to make sure that I'm not over fertilizing, if you will, before these, you know, plants really even put on their kind of forever leaves, which I do want to make a quick comment on. Think about what your plants look like when they're out in the garden, and think about the leaves that you have on these plants when they're indoors. Like, don't go on a crusade feeling like you have to save every leaf, right? You know, recognize that there's going to be some loss between when you're starting for a lot of plants and once they get outdoors.
Well, first understand that those cotyledons are going to yellow and fall off. That is the purpose of them.
I would have watched or listened to this episode and felt bad if we hadn't mentioned that. So good job. Yeah.
Yeah, because, I mean, I recently got a comment and somebody said, my leaves are turning yellow on my, you know, the first leaves that came up were turning yellow. And so what we need to understand is the purpose of a cotyledon leaf is, first of all, to be very confusing when you say it. But second of all, it's to come up and then get as much light as possible to feed that plant and so it can make its true leaves. And that's why they always look different than the actual leaves. So they are designed to turn yellow and fall off. That's just part of it. So once you understand that, you can eliminate that worry off the bat. So you should see those fall off at the same time. You've already got true leaves. Once you get your true leaves, their job's done. They're going to get shaded out, which is another point of discoloration. All of this is related, people, I'm telling you. And then it will fall off, and then you can go. Now, my fertilization, I started off doing just like Batavia. And when Batavia says diluted, I think we need to be very clear what diluted means. Diluted for a seedling, especially the first feeding, for me, means a tea to a tablespoon of fish fertilizer to like 2-liter bottle of water. I mean, you want that to just barely be brown. Like not hardly brown at all. And the other purposes, it doesn't make your house smell like crap. So there is that, because that stuff is rough, dude. But I actually changed from that, and I use Osmocote. It's a pellet. It's slow release. So you put it in and it'll slowly start to release. And then I reserve the fish fertilizer for emergency. And then my final feeding after it goes out, or either right before I harden it off or after I harden it off. It's my final feeding before I plant it out. So that's and it's still diluted, just like I said, but it's already got that Osmocote in there. That Osmocote can feed for like 4 months. So that pellet that you put in there, and all I do is I grab a handful of it, and I'll just barely sprinkle in there. You don't want a whole lot in there, just a little bit, just to kind of feed it a little bit. And if you're overwatered, you can put that pellet on there, and that water will release that fertilizer into it. And so it will, if you have discoloration issues and you're like, I don't know what it is, you can always put that on there, let it dry, let that happen, and then it'll kind of work itself out. You can reverse discoloration issues.
Are you sprinkling the pellets on top of the soil?
Yep, right on top.
Yeah.
And then as I water, they get in, and then it cracks the top of it, and you'll pick up the pellet and see the fertilizer coming out. It is not organic. So I'm very clear about that. It is not organic, but it is very gentle, it is very slow release, and it is very minimal. Whereas if you use like a Miracle Grow, and you can easily nuke your plants right away, because you got to remember, it's just like having a little baby. It's just very tender. You can't, it doesn't have that robust system to help it. It's going to get, just like a baby, it's going to get a cold every time it walks into the store. It's the same thing. It's going to get burned. So you want to be very, very careful, very light feedings. And that's why I use the Osmocote, because once I put it in, I'm kind of done at that point. I don't have to do too much more. So that's the method that I use, and it's fairly cheap. In a 5-pound bag, I start a lot of seeds, and a 5-pound bag lasted me 3 years. I'm probably going to need to get a new one at the end of this year of 2025.
You said, I think you said, like, going outside, thinking about the explosion of growth, there is like almost like it's steroids. But there's almost, isn't it the opposite? Like being indoors, you're kind of getting the bare minimum of what you need, when we're starting plants indoors. Like I'm stopping short of saying kind of there's a sickness, because, generally speaking, we're talking about keeping plants healthy. It's like once you get outside, it is, no supplements. You're getting all of the natural things you need to be the best version of your plant self. When you think about where it ideally wants to grow versus kind of we're starting them indoors because we want to get ahead of schedule for things. So maybe the initial jolt is more like a steroid, but really you've kind of settled into your kind of regular natural life as a plant once you get outdoors. And I think the theme that's emerging from our talks is, for me in particular as a gardener, it's like the race outside. And this is a significant change for me. Like I've been comfortable with, 3-inch tall, 6-inch tall pepper pepper plants that have 10 true leaves on it. And it's like, like I'm still feeding it and I'm still adjusting lights. And it's like, girl, get that thing outside. So I'm again talking myself into it this year, because my environment indoors, I'm just holding on to keep it in some level of ideal for the plants for indoor growing. And
I like to look at it as you want to make them thrive inside. And the difference is, I don't know if that's
possible, really.
I mean, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but my stuff thrives. But let me rephrase it. It didn't thrive until I started feeding. That's when things started to change, and I wasn't like, white knuckling it all the way to the finish line. Like, I'm going to make it, when you're running that race and you're like, okay, just push one step forward. Like, once I started feeding, I felt confident. And the problem that I ended up having was trying to get the plants outside before they were too big. So that was the issue I had. But the feeding was everything. And I came to realize the difference between inside and outside is the soil and everything inside is sterile. Everything. Your soil's sterile, your water's sterile. You're probably using water from your faucet. You may be using it from your rain barrel, but most people are from their faucet. Hell, I do it from my faucet. And that water is basically sterile. You put it outside, you got all kinds of stuff coming in. I mean, you got the good, the bad, the ugly, and you've got nitrogen being added to it. Where I'm adding nitrogen inside, but if it rains, you're getting nitrogen. If you've got manure in your soil, you're getting nitrogen. You're getting all of this other stuff. You have a lot more options. And so I can see the difference in that versus inside, where like basically the soil that we're using, since you switched over to the dark side, welcome, is sterile. It's got 10 days worth of food. I mean, it clearly tells you. So it's like, what's next? You know what I mean? Maybe
it's an unfair comparison, like the growth indoors. When you say that your plants thrive for indoor growing, like for that type of growing. But your plants are only going to ever truly thrive once they're outside in the elements, in its natural growing space. I'm not talking about like your hydroponic grows and all of that. I'm talking about the idea we're starting seeds with the intention of getting them outside. And maybe it's just it's like two different parts of your life, if you will, right? And those early years, you are again going to be much more sensitive than you will in 6 or 8 weeks once we get outside, right? I don't know.
I think part of it too
I need to
is,
workshop that a little bit more.
We could do that after the episode. The other part of it is the seed cell has but so much space. So, eventually what happens is your roots will wrap and wrap and wrap and wrap. And then the plant will be like, no, I got to produce a seed. And it's going to go to seed. And I mean, I've got spinach pushing pollen out all over my room right now. So, I mean, I shook it the other day and pollen came off of it. So, it's stressed. It's not going to make it. And it's saying, hold up, let's spread. So if you were to take, there's no doubt in my mind in this setup, if I made it so it was like a little raised bed, I could grow a cabbage to get ahead. I'm certain of that. I just have to have the space. I may only be able to get one cabbage per self, but I would be able to get it, instead of that 2-inch seed cell where there's just no space. And so you can't hold but so much nutrients in there. There's not but so much for the roots to spread. There's not a lot of space for water and all that stuff. So there's a big difference, but we're growing for the purpose of moving outside. We're not growing for the purpose of harvesting inside. There's two totally different worlds. And I think you got to understand that. I'm sure you could grow a radish inside, no problem. A bunch of radishes in a gallon pot. I'm sure you could. But that's not the purpose of what we're doing. And when you realize that it's like overwintering a pepper plant. You can overwinter a pepper plant, but it's not going to thrive in that because of the amount of space that root system has. So there's a lot of factors, and that's what I find so interesting about gardening. There's so many factors involved, and I think we as gardeners tend to try and dumb it down a little bit. And I think we need to lean into the fact that like it's really complicated and you can't compare inside to outside. You just have to understand the differences and what you're working with. And going back to the beginning with lights are a big part of it. If you don't have super strong lights, you're always going to have that issue, but there is a downfall to having really strong lights, and overpowered lights is really what the word I should be using is overpowered.
Leonard keeps on catching me looking at my phone because I need to check to see if we plotted the spacing episode. Did we actually schedule that when we're going to have it? When you were just talking about there's only so much size, it immediately makes me think about spacing.
Yes.
Well, there are a couple of different facets of spacing. Okay, good. We have it on the schedule.
It's on there. Yeah, it's been well promoted on the show.
Well, it's such an important topic because it's one of those things that I think we take for granted. I mean, we've talked about a lot of the things that could be taken for granted that will impact the thing that you're growing. You know, and when we say impacted, like, I mean, one could argue impacted positively for sure, but obviously impacted negatively. I saw a picture of someone with like 3 different, it felt like someone sharing a picture of someone else's plants, but 3 different pepper plants in 3 different size containers. And they were saying, oh, this is basically, you know, size matters, right? One was probably 5 feet tall in the largest container, and down to like maybe 3 feet tall, down to like maybe 2 or something. And someone asked and they commented, well, no, this is all one growing season. Because that's what you would think. Maybe the largest one is in year 2 or something, you know, but it's just interesting how much more you can get in some cases if there's more space, obviously depending on the plant. So anywho, I don't want to dig too much further into that.
Before we go on to the listener question of the day on the words of spacing and stuff like that, I want to say this. Remember this. Hogs get slaughtered. That's all I got to say. Don't be greedy. So, and we'll get into that very soon. We have that episode coming up. And that's, I think, the number one mistake all gardeners make is spacing across the board. That's a bold statement, I understand, but I know that I have fought spacing tooth and nail for years and years and years, and I don't even have it down pat. I'm gonna go ahead and tell you right off the bat, like, I don't have it down pat. I get greedy, and I suffered big time last year, so there is that. So let's not get too deep into that. But before we get into the listener question of the day, I do want to say it is planting season. Check out the Planter app. The link is below in the description. It's available on the Google and Apple Play Store. It's a simple drag and drop interface, square foot garden style. It tells you your spacing. It basically is pre-programmed for it. Gives you visual cues for your companion and combative plantings if you want to use that. You can design your whole garden. It's so visual. It's a lot of fun to use. They're adding a lot of flowers to it, so you can factor that in. You can have multiple profiles for different sections of your yard, compare them each year so you can use it for your crop rotation. So check out the Planter app. It is a sponsor of the show for a reason, because it is an absolute dream to use for your garden, and it really will help your productivity. And that's the Planter app, the Planter app, available on the Google and Apple Play Store. All right, listener question of the day. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Good, because I am too. So, Gregory writes, what is the best way to water? Bottom watering or top watering? And what steps to take to keep from overwatering?
Hey, Gregory. Wait, no. He deserves better. Hey, Gregory. There we go. That was like underwatering for the bale, and then I came back in and overwatered. Yikes.
So what do you think?
I'll be honest. I don't know if bottom watering is the best method. Oh, that's the method I use. I do believe all of my house plants I water, top water. If you are experienced when it comes to growing, plants, indoor plants, or, starting things by seed, I think top watering is just fine. I think if you're diligent in your ability to kind of stay the course when it comes to bottom watering. I think that that's better for the plant itself, but it may not be the best for the actual gardener. So for me, just quickly, I take a jug, or watering can, remove the seed tray the seedlings from the seed tray. Most times I can just lift it up, and I put water inside of the actual tray that it doesn't have holes in it, put the seedlings back in. And sometimes, again, it's just removing 1 6-pack and I can put the water in. I probably put about an inch of water in it throughout the entire tray. I go through the rounds of that, letting the water kind of get absorbed into the plants. And this is where my mistake comes in, because however much water I put in, it's almost always too much, because then I have to find a way to empty out that water, and that's the pain. That's where I end up leaving water sitting too long. Once plants get a certain size or age, something that's like more 8 weeks old, I'm typically watering on top, and I'm just basically going across with my watering can and letting the entire cell absorb that water. That happens much quicker than if you're letting it happen naturally through bottom watering.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We do it totally opposite.
Yeah, well.
So what I do is I top water all the way until I physically can't get water to the soil. And then I still top water, but I let it flow through, fill up, and then I wait to water. And usually I don't do that. So my shelf will hold 4 10 by 20 trays. And those trays, when they're full and all the plants are about the same size, I'll just let that go. I'll put all the water on top, and then I don't drain the water out at all. I'll just let it use up that water. That means they will be sitting in stagnant water. But at this point, the roots are so big that they're sucking up a lot of water really fast. And we've got fans going and stuff like that. So that water is actually burning off pretty quickly as well. But at first I strictly top water, and I do like a 2-second count into that. Now, as far as the question of which is best, this comes from me growing bonsai. So when we plant, we use inorganic, non-porous soil. Basically, it's small rocks. And they've done studies on it. The Japanese are pretty intense about this stuff. What they've done is they've done studies, and they did top watering and bottom watering, because there's always a huge, you want to think gardening has like camps. It's nothing compared
to bonsai.
Nothing. Yeah. So what they did, and they found after they tested the water, is that when you top water, what's happening is you're actually getting nitrogen from the air and you're pushing it into the soil. And so that's pushing that nitrogen down into the soil, and that's giving those roots a little bit more nitrogen. And so there's some trees that I'll do where I will top water, and some of them have to stay wet year round. So I'll top water them and then let them fill up and then suck up the water. So I just kind of adopted that and moved it over into this and said, okay, if that's the case, I don't know if it's true. They did the study. Cool. I'm just going to rock it and run with it. So that's how I roll with it. And I just water from the top, let it fill up, and then it'll use it up. But in the beginning, because we're, like we said earlier, I'm super cautious about overwatering. I don't do that. This is in the final, probably 3 weeks of the plant growing out inside. And also the whole tray has to be filled up for the most part as well. But I'm not overly concerned about it. And what that does is that leaves me time to not have to water so much. So I'll do that, wait for it to dry, look for that crinkling leaf, and then I'll do it all over again.
Okay.
What do you think?
I think that the more we talk, we always find differences. Some of them slight, some of them very, very overt as far as the difference. So I think there's
what do you think about the... Go ahead.
I think there's almost like the opposite effect of what you do versus what I do. I think maybe top watering is easier for the person watering, right? Just when it comes to the time commitment and the satisfaction of you feel like this thing has gotten watered. versus the weight, from bottom watering. I do believe that we are both aligned at the very beginning, primarily because we don't want to displace seeds by bottom watering.
Yeah.
I think we answered this question.
Yeah, I think the most important part of it is it doesn't really matter as long as you're getting water to your seeds. I think that's the really important part of it. You can go and so just to go back, when we're growing our little trees in pots, the whole reason why there's an argument is because we're trying to maximize growth in a really short period of time, where you want to take a tree that's as big as your index finger and make it as big as your thumb, around as your thumb. The whole idea is to get thickness of the trunk. Yeah. And you're trying to mimic that and change it. And here's a shout out to an upcoming episode. The only thing to do that with is by giving the plant space. The watering has nothing to do with it. The nutrients has nothing to do with it. It's all about the space. And it's the same here. I really think we're not growing these plants to the same design. We're just growing them to a planting out size. That's all we care about. So it's totally different, but just get the water to the plants. How's that?
You mentioned shading out things and thinning to avoid that. It just reminded me that even if you have in a 6-pack a single plant in each cell, depending on the plant, one could outshade the other, especially if there are 2 different sizes, 3 different sizes plants or whatever. So just one more thing to think about when it comes to what you keep an eye on as you are kind of growing indoors before we get outside. It's almost time.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. So on that note, thank you for listening to the Backyard Gardens podcast. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by becoming a subscriber, patron, buy something from Amazon on our list, especially check out the seed starting list. There's bee stuff in there. There's fertilization, all kinds of stuff, and get some seeds. We have our seeds available on Etsy for you to start a garden. Who doesn't want an official Backyard Gardens garden? I mean, come on, people. And remember, we do 2 things on this show. We learn to grow, and we grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Thanks for checking out the show. If you like what we're doing and you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at patreon.com/backyardgardens, or you can be an Apple subscriber, and in both of those, you'll get an extra episode every month. You can also make a one-time PayPal donation with the link below, and you can get all kinds of gardening gear like t-shirts and mugs and cups from the link below at Teespring, and we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.
Ready to level up? Chumba Casino is your playbook to fun. It's free to play with no purchase necessary. Enjoy hundreds of casino-style games like bingo, slots, and solitaire anytime, anywhere, with fresh releases every week. Whether you're at home or on the go, let Chumba Casino bring the excitement to you. Plus, get free daily login bonuses and a free welcome bonus. Join now for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. Play Chumba Casino today. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. T&Cs apply.